Welcome to the show. We've got a great show today. This is day 2 of my self-imposed 3-day knife challenge. Today we're going to make a sort of post-apocalyptic improvised rebar karambit. But first, I need to fire up the forge. And unfortunately, something is missing from my forge. And that would be charcoal. So before I can get to work forging, I will need to make a quick run to town and pick up charcoal and also pick up some grinding belts. And since you're here, I figured I might as well take you along for the ride. But don't worry, I'm in a hurry, so this is going to go fast. In fact, by the time I get done talking about it, I'll probably already be back firing up the forge. We're going to use 1/2-inch rebar for the project. And the first thing to do is to forge out what's going to become the blade. And to do that, I'm just going to flatten and draw out the rebar. As you can see, I'm trying to work about half on and half off the edge. That just helps to draw out the steel a little bit faster. I tried a little experiment here. I don't have a cross-peen hammer, so I actually took out a splitting maul. It's pretty blunt, but it still didn't really work the best. So I went back to the hammer. It probably takes a little bit longer to draw out the metal than if I had a cross-peen, but it really doesn't take that long. As you can see here, I'm kind of forging in a little bit of a point on this blade, but a little bit later you'll see that with some changes I make to it, all that work was kind of for nothing, but it's good practice anyway. At a certain point I noticed it was starting to sprinkle outside. I do have the forge set up outside. It's kind of like right in the entryway, but if it rains too hard I'm not going to be able to keep working, so I ran out there to take a look. It didn't look good, but the storm never really materialized, so I was able to keep working. So once I had the blade more or less the way I liked it, I turned it around, cut off the excess, and got to work drawing out the tang of the knife. This really is going to be the handle, and I need to draw it out to a nice thin sort of whip-like tang so I can curl that around to make the loop for my finger. I didn't quite get the whole process on camera. For some reason, the first couple minutes of putting the curl in here, somehow the camera just wasn't rolling. But you get the idea of how this works. You just kind of keep after it and keep working it until you get the shape that you want. At a certain point, I could tell that I really had too much material, and I had to go in and cut a couple of inches off the end. So once I had that finger loop the way I wanted it, it was time to go in and clean up the profile of the blade. For some reason the 1x30 was acting up today. I actually broke a belt on it. So I actually wound up using a lot of different tools to finish this knife. I had already forged a little bit of a bevel, but I wanted to do the rest with the 1x30, and then I wound up breaking another belt. It just developed all kinds of problems. And finally I decided to give up on it for now and come back to it later. So as you see here, I used the angle grinder to finish out the bevel. And you'll notice there's actually a cutoff wheel on there. It's an older wheel and it's pretty worn, so it has a little bit of flex in it. So that helped me to take a little bit at a time, and I didn't have to worry about gouging the metal. So it actually worked pretty well. I decided to go with an oil quench for this. I've actually tested both oil and water in the past, and I found that the water quench was probably the most reliable way to really get a good quench on rebar, at least on the rebar that I've been using. But in this case, I decided to go with oil because I knew it would be less likely to crack or warp. And since I'm working on a pretty tight schedule right now, I really couldn't afford to screw this thing up at this stage. As you can see here with the file, the quench worked very well. The steel is quite hard. In fact, if you listen, you can hear the difference between the file kind of skating over the blade where it was hardened and digging into the handle where the steel is still soft. So with the hardening done, it's time to temper it back a little. For this, I just put it in the oven for 1 hour at 400 degrees. That gave me a little time to fix the problem with the 1x30 and get that working again. So to finish the bevel, I just took my time, made sure to keep the blade cool by dipping it in water, and did my best to work evenly across the full length of the blade, taking a little at a time until I had the bevel that I wanted. And then to actually sharpen the edge, I used an old, very worn 120 grit belt. I like the look of this. It seems like it has good balance. So you'll see me kind of having a little bit of fun with it, but I am not by any means skilled with a karambit. About the only thing I really know about using a karambit is that if you don't know what you're doing, it's really easy to hurt yourself. I'm definitely being very careful to keep that blade away from my wrist. And that's one kind of injury I really don't want to capture on film. I decided to do the paper test, but I could only find a few little scraps of paper laying around. I guess I went a little nuts yesterday with the chef's knife. But it cuts the paper I had. And with that, I'm going to call it a day. It was a fun project. I'm glad for the way it turned out, but it has been a long day and a lot of work. Also, I think my hat is pretty much completely destroyed. Yikes. Definitely time to pick up a new one. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please like and subscribe. And as I mentioned before, this is part of a 3 knives in 3 days project I'm doing. Yesterday, I made a chef's knife out of a machete, so go check that video out. And be sure to check back tomorrow for the final installment. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you in the next video.